Good, here we go. I'm a recovered alcoholic. My name's Tony. Welcome everybody to the Thursday night Big Book Study Workshop with a program of recovery laid out by the first 100 men and women in our basic text, Friday days, April 8, 1989. How we open this meetings with a bit of outside help. What do we need for a good meeting? God. Grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Right on. Hope everybody has an open mind, present, and is here. If we can mute everybody, Brandon, that'd be great, except for Katie and myself. Katie, good to see you.
Yeah,
here nice and early.
Good to go.
And then, there we go. So, good. We're ready to rock. So tonight we're going to be interesting. I was meditating this week, and this reoccurring theme kept on coming up. I kind of let my buddy Ray know ahead of time a bit. I know Katie won't have her 12 and 12 with you. Do you have your 12 and 12, Katie? No, do you even own one? Anyways, we won't go there for the traditions. So we're going to cover some points on what responsible sponsorship looks like, and our purpose as a group when they talk about the traditions and carrying this message and making this available for people. As we agnostics for those that are following along, and it's really interesting that how many people feel they don't need to read We Agnostics because they make a predetermined evaluation of the title. Anybody? It'd be the same, like more about alcoholism or Bill. It's one of the largest chapters in the book for a reason, right? And it's the setup to the introduction of the decision we're going to make in 3. It prepares us to what it's really all about. Now, in the 12 and 12, there's a lot of places that people get introduced to the 12 and 12 before they're introduced to the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous. And some places don't even introduce people to the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous. There's where I tried to get sober in Ontario, it was all 12 and 12 based. Even when I go back and visit now, they're all 12 and 12 based. 98% of the fellowship's 12 and 12 based. Most people try to help people who are coming into the fellowship who are dying of alcoholism using the 12 and 12, right? Because they were guided or they were explained or it seems to be working for them thus far, this idea that the 12 and 12 are the steps or the program of recovery, right? And so there's a lot of misinformation in regards to what the purpose of each book is. We're going to kind of cover that tonight. And if you're kind of looking at this, we've covered it in the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous, right from the title page and the introduction to forward to the first edition. You with us, Katie? Good to see you.
I'm here.
Good, you're here. You were missed last week. They had to deal with me. So there you go.
All on your own?
All on my own. No, I had God with me, so we did pretty good. So, forward to the first edition. Let's see what the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous is all about. Lay it on us. First paragraph.
I'm a recovered alcoholic. My name is Katie. XIII, forward to the first edition. We of Alcoholics Anonymous are more than 100 men and women who have recovered from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. To show other alcoholics precisely how we have recovered is the main purpose of this book.
So that is the highlight of what they're saying here. The main purpose of this book is to show us how they recovered from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body, right? So as we went through this, they talked about earlier that this is a basic text, the transferring of information. Here we see from the group of people who had input in this was over 100 men and women. By the time we get to the 4th edition here, it says the story of how many thousands of men and women who have recovered from alcoholism, right? So they put their collective experience is found where? In the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous. And that hasn't changed since the beginning. Format, come on, buddy. Let my dog get. So that hasn't changed since the beginning when they wrote this thing. Right on. So since they wrote this thing in 1939, right? So as we go through this, we look at the 12 and 12. Since you don't have it, page 17, since we're there on the introduction, for those of you that, it talks about on page 17, it says, nevertheless, the Infinite Society determined to set down its experience in the book, which finally reached the public in 1939. Which book is that? Their experience is the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous. At this time, the recoveries numbered about 100. The book called Alcoholics Anonymous, and from it, the fellowship took its name. So it's wild, eh? So our name in the fellowship, right, of the program of Alcoholics Anonymous is taken from the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous. What do we call it? Alcoholics Anonymous. So we see one of the big misconceptions within our fellowship. A lot of people call the fellowship the program, and we really do people a disservice when we introduce and say welcome to the program, when they're actually in the fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous, not the program. A lot of us are in need of a program, which is outlined in the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous. Okay, the book called Alcoholics Anonymous. From it, the fellowship took its name. In it, alcoholism was described from the alcoholic's point of view. So who put this together? The alcoholics, right? That's why we kind of ventured off from the doctor's opinion and his ideas to the collective experience of those who were afflicted with this illness. We kind of got together and talked about what this looked like, how it affected us, what was different than those who were going through the facility at Dr. Silkworth's facility, and how his method seemed to work for them, but it didn't seem to work for people like us. What was different about us from them? And then they kind of put that all through, and they really emphasized that in more about alcoholism. What makes us different than other people? And then earlier when they talked about, those who are able to get sober based on different methods, and why the alcoholic can't seem to get sober regardless of what they do. Right, and he gave us that guy who was obsessed, long day today, with the idea of fixing himself, which most of us are, right? And then unless you're afflicted with this illness, we find out that we can't fix ourselves based on self because we're afflicted with an illness, not a behavioral problem. Here we go. So the application, this is codified in the 12 steps, and the application of these steps to the alcoholic's dilemma was made clear. Where was that made clear? In the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous. The remainder of the book was devoted to 30 stories of case histories in which the alcoholic described their drinking experience and recoveries. This established identification with the alcoholic readers to proved to them that the virtual impossible had now become impossible. That's the stories in the back of the book and what we read earlier, right? The book Alcoholics Anonymous became the basic text of our fellowship. So they're reiterating what they mentioned earlier, right? Of the fellowship, and still is. This present volume, the 12 and 12, this present volume proposes to broaden and deepen the understanding of the 12 steps as first written in the earlier work. So, if I was sitting around reading the 12 and 12, and I haven't done the earlier work, which is the outline of the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous, which is our program, can I deepen and broaden my understanding of something that I don't have?
No.
But you wouldn't know that if nobody explained to you at page 17, and if it was explained to you, or you're under the impression that you're doing the program of recovery by reading the 12 and 12. So we're not going to get into the actual understanding of who wrote the 12 and 12. We'll just stick with the common understanding that Bill wrote it, right? You could get into that later on your own time if you want to kind of be surprised, but we'll go with the idea Bill wrote it. What did Bill write? He wrote his experience 13 years roughly afterwards of having gone through this process. 13 years of experience. So when you're sitting reading the 12 and 12, you're reading Bill's experience of having applied the program of recovery to his life to obtain what? A psychic change or spiritual experience. If you don't have that roadmap, would you be able to have the same experience or duplicate, or kind of apply the same understanding that Bill's presenting? So what happens is you sit around and you're discussing somebody else's experience, hoping it'll be yours. Right? Because that's really what you're doing. So if you're in a meeting, right, and you're newly sober and somebody was sharing how they recovered, and then everybody started talking about their experience, would that be your experience? It wouldn't be your experience. You would have to do what they did in order to get that same experience. So as we go along, what's missing from the 12 and 12, because it's to deepen and broaden, is the doctor's opinion, right? Description of alcoholism. And as we go along here, which is really, really interesting, they started talking about when we go to We Agnostics, page 44, they talk about what's the first paragraph saying there. Page 44, first paragraph.
We agnostics. In the preceding chapters, you have learned something of alcoholism.
So in the 12 and 12, you're just reading step 1, which has no understanding of that. They talk about the double-edged sword, hitting bottom. Most of us have, but you wouldn't understand what they meant by the double-edged sword unless you went through the preceding chapters. And nobody would really explain that to you, because in 11 years of me being in and out of the fellowship, thinking I was in the program, kept on getting drunk, sitting in these 12 and 12s. I never understood what they meant by the double-edged sword, let alone John Barleycorn. I had no idea. I used to think, poor bastard, right? But I didn't know that was alcohol, right? Everybody else seemed to know. So I was sitting there trying to have what I understand now is Bill's experience, but not doing what he did to get it, right? So it's a summary of his experience and the expansion of the deepening and broadening of the understanding of the principles that he experienced in the town's hospital going through it with Evie. Yes? And they're kind of more expanded in the big book, so it's more palatable for us, right? There were 6 understandings, and there's some filler in there, right? I call them transition steps, right? When you actually look at, there's 6 application and 6 transition, right? The 1 step prepares us for the next step, right? And there's some transition steps that a lot of people refer to them as action steps, but really they prepare you for the next phase in the development. Go ahead.
We hope we have made clear the distinction between the alcoholic and the non-alcoholic.
See, which is critical, right? If you read the 12 and 12, you wouldn't be able to understand that distinction, because basically everybody who said they were an alcoholic would qualify based on what? They would go with the behavior and the troubles they had with alcohol, but not what made them alcoholic, right? And that's where you hear a lot of the catchphrase stuff. Oh, I'm powerless. What does that mean? I'm powerless over everything. They really don't understand what they're saying. So for clarity, for the guys who helped me participate in the saving of my own life without realizing that I was doing that, would really disturb me about my understanding of things. And one of the things they asked in early, before they qualified me and conned me into a big book study, was, what's an alcoholic? Which I found a strange question after being in and out for 11 years, right? And I would get into all the behaviorals and all the consequences, but I never described what an alcoholic was in any shape or form, right? So a lot of other new people were agreeing with me because they didn't understand either. They had the same understanding I did because they haven't been through this process. It's really interesting if you want to see how well your sponsees are doing, or how well your sponsor that you seem to be working with is doing. Ask them to explain that before my sponsees move on. I get them to explain that. Can you explain the difference? What's an alcoholic and what not an alcoholic, right? And you'd be amazed how many people don't know the fundamentals to that, right? Is the first thing they talk about is the malady that centers in the mind, as described on page 23, right? They haven't even talked about the spiritual condition, but a lot of people refer to that because they think that's what makes them alcoholic, is the behaviors, the things before they drank, how they felt, No, alcohol reveals alcoholism. It doesn't cause it. Mm-hmm. Right? So it's one of those things, without getting into the addiction, blah, blah, blah. But if you don't have the physical component to our illness, then you'll probably be okay, right? You'll be able to change or modify as you go along here. So as we go along, which is really interesting here, it talks about to one who feels he is atheist. Right? And we already covered this last week, right? If you have this illness and you qualify as being afflicted with it, then you have one or two alternatives. One is to go on to the bitter end, because your story is not going to change. You're going to continue to relapse like Bill did. Remember in Bill's story? He'd get sober for a while, real determined, relapse. real determined, relapse, right? The second time he left treatment, he knew why he was getting the insidious insanity, and he talked about returning because he had no solution. The difference, the third time he put into application a solution that allowed him to have a psychic change, right, or spiritual experience, and a way of life that answered all his problems. Then we seen the application of that after he left the facility as he started to clean up his life through the application of these principles and allowing him to go further than he ever did in his previous experience because he had a new basis now, right? A spiritual basis of living, spiritual kit of tools. But he had the experience of having it. It moved from a knowledge base that he had sitting at the kitchen table with Ebby to an experience, the same experience that Ebby was having as the result of going through this course of action that he's expanded here, or they've expanded. So this whole point is we're going to get to in a second. So we've moved from a behavioral solution-based idea to, I need a spiritual solution-based. Yes? The whole book has reemphasized all the way through, right? How many times people try to fix themselves, right? And found it didn't work. The guy on page 26 was obsessed. The best help money can get. Relapse was unthinkable, yes, because he didn't do step one. Once he had a step one experience, he realized nothing short of a psychic change or spiritual experience will help him. And we have all those who went before us. So now they talk about here, finding to have this, well, let's read it. To one who feels he is atheist or agnostic.
To one who feels he is atheist or agnostic, such an experience seems impossible. But to continue as he is means disaster.
So what experience?
This spiritual experience.
Yeah, the psychic change of spiritual experience, which they made reference to early in the book to read it in the back so you know who's talking about, what they're talking about. So it's all about getting the collective understanding of those who put this together. It's not about getting my understanding. Nowhere thus far has it told you to choose your understanding, has it?
We have to understand what they're talking about.
100%, right?
Okay.
And so the 12 and 12, guess what it doesn't have in the back of the book is a spiritual appendix explaining the general consensus or understanding, right? As we understand it.
By the time you get to the 12 by 12, you should have already gone through this. That's the whole point.
100%. But there's a lot of people teaching people to go through the 12 and 12 with no introduction to the big book. There's some people who have never been introduced or taken through the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous within our own fellowship, and they're wondering, they're baffled why they keep on relapsing because they're doing what everybody else is doing, but they don't realize they may be a little different than those people, given good reason, right? And here's a big group of people that they talk about. Remember what they talked about earlier was on page 2021. They talked about given good reason. Right? Remember those people? Ill health, falling in love, like they have all the characteristics, they have all the symptoms, right? At the top of page 21, a warning of a doctor becomes out. This man or woman can also stop or moderate if they may find it difficult and troublesome and may need even medical attention or a support group.
Right.
Right? And AA is the biggest support group for a 12-step fellowship there is. So not everybody within the fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous is an alcoholic of this type, are they? So it's really important to qualify your sponsor. Totally. Beforehand, really. And most people who've been through this qualify their sponsees.
Yeah. We
were just talking, me and his sponsor were talking today, and he was talking about this guy. He doesn't have the first step component, but he has the human condition. I said, that's Al-Anon, right? That's what Al-Anon's for. He's married to an alcoholic. He should be going to Al-Anon to deal with his human condition, which is the same application, the same course of action, but they are able to really go more on a behavioral application of this thing through the educational than the alcoholic who has to have a psychic change or spiritual experience. Because when they have emotional disturbance, that's it. They get to apologize. When we get to disturbed to a level where the insanity returns, we're out of the game. See the difference? Right? Big, huge difference, right?
Yeah.
But we all have the human condition.
Yeah.
Right? But with us, it's fatal because we have a different component, this illness. right, that checks us out. That's why we're always continually doing acts against our own will. Anybody here? Anybody prone to acts against their own will? Surprised, baffled, I can't believe this is happening again? Waiter, make it a double. Okay. So, go ahead.
Where?
Yeah, back to 44, yeah.
44. And I just want to add, it gets confusing sitting in meetings because you hear things like, people ask the question, what makes you an alcoholic? And they say, I'm an alcoholic if I say I'm an alcoholic. Well, that's not true. That's not what the big book says. You hear that stuff in meetings, because there's a few people in there that really want to be there, making friends, getting dates, I'm not sure. But, the people whose lives really depend on this thing need to understand what they're up against. You're not an alcoholic just because you say you are. You're an alcoholic if you have the allergy and you have the malady.
And whether you're beyond human aid or not. Not everybody, because they raised the bottom, that's a good point, not everybody is beyond human aid. That's why in earlier sobriety, back when I first started getting sober, I was able to stay sober for longer durations of time than I was as the years went on. The duration went less and less and less because the illness kept on progressing, even though I was trying to manage it 100%. A lot of people are baffled. They talked about earlier, a lot of people giving good reason. A lot of alcoholics can stay sober for months or years. Right? And the illness is lying dormant, and when it represents itself as the insanity that precedes the first drink, it's confusing, right? Because we go, look how long I stayed sober the last time. Anybody here? You weren't really sober the last time. What you were experiencing was abstinence, and the illness was lying dormant, right? What they classify as recovered here is where the illness is removed and you're no longer afflicted with it. You're left with the human component. That's what we're going to get into now, right? So, but excellent point.
Okay, but to continue as he is means disaster, especially if he is an alcoholic of the hopeless variety.
And what's that?
Yep, you're beyond human aid.
Yeah, what determines that?
A relapse.
Relapses, but how many times have I drinking against my own will? And think I made the choice to do it.
Yeah.
Because a lot of people think they choose to drink again after what's happened to them the last time and the time before. That would be a subtle form of insanity, wouldn't it? Based on everything that's happened to you, you're choosing to do it again. It's like me eating pistachios for the third time and then ending up in the hospital 3 times in a row because I'm seeing a psychiatrist now. I'm not seeing a dietitian. There's something fundamentally wrong in my recall, right? But I like the effect it has on me. Go ahead. That choking thing, but that's a different fellowship. Okay, moving on.
To be doomed to an alcoholic death.
Which isn't good. To be doomed to an alcoholic death. If you ever seen alcoholics dying from this thing, it's pretty wild. Like when they say we only felt the nip of the ringer, right? I've seen people like mind-boggling. I was turning a little jaundice. My liver was getting like I was in the throes of it. But I've seen some people live long periods of like brutal. There's one lady I seen in the meeting. I thought she was like her stomach was out like from her liver. Like it was wild. It was like I'm not gonna go there. Okay, move on.
To be doomed to an alcoholic death or to live on a spiritual basis are not always easy alternatives to face.
Which is interesting, right? Because that's where the doctor gets this idea that we're maladjusted, full-fledged from reality, and downright mental defectives. You ask anybody else with any other kind of illness, hey, if you lived upon a few simple spiritual tools and applied them to your life, you could recover from this illness that's killing you. There would no be, well, how long till I get to choose? Right? Because what we're left with is our understanding what we think spiritual principles are. That's why we need to go through we agnostics, because it kind of dummies down a lot of my thinking. Or remember when Bill was sitting at the kitchen table? He wasn't struggling with Ebby's experience. He was struggling with his own experience. Most people who are having a hard time in step 2 are struggling with their own understanding. They're not struggling with ours. Because if you understood ours, there's no struggle whatsoever. Right? The reason you're struggling because you don't understand what we're talking about. So you need to go through We Agnostics. You need to find a member that's been through here. And it kind of is self-explanatory as we go through here. Okay? So here's the behavioral part, right? But
it isn't so difficult. About half of our original fellowship were of exactly that type. At first, some of us tried to avoid the issue, hoping against hope we were not true alcoholics.
Meaning, I don't need a psychic change or spiritual experience. I could just read the 12 and 12, talk about Bill's experience, right? And better myself, open the door for people, try not to swear in meetings, conduct myself as saintly as possible. In traffic, don't give nobody the finger. Let the people with 20 items go in the checkout list for 15 without saying anything. Get some Lululemon pants, join the gym and start yoga and get some incense burning in the morning. You know, like that shit. If that shit worked, I would have over 46 years of sobriety. Because when it said, I struggle with my own understanding. So in step 2, it says, find a power greater than yourself. I thought they meant for me to go find that power. I'm on a quest. Anybody in step 2 here go on a quest? I'm on a quest now. I can't do 3 yet because I haven't found God, right? Check the trunk. No. So he's there, right? So see how fast we go from, we hear a bit and then let me take it from here, boss. Like, let me in the game, right? So step 2, most people, when they talk about step 2 in a meeting, they're talking about what they think it means. They're not talking about what we mean, because what we mean is a course of action to bring about a psychic change or spiritual experience, allowing me to recover from step 1. That's what step 2 is. Step 2 isn't my relationship with God. That's 11 and 12. How many people here talk about their relationship with God in step 2? Come on, be honest. That's not step 2. Yeah. You wouldn't know that if you read the 12 and 12, though. Right? Because if you're reading the 12 and 12 and already been through this, you've already established your relationship. So you understand that the solution to my problem is this relationship that I've already acquired because I've been through the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. So when I read step 2, which is the basis of the fundamental idea, what the solution is, what we're going to get into. But before that, why the 12 and 12 seems to work for a great group of people within our fellowship and not another group of people. They're going to explain it right here. Go ahead.
Okay. Hoping against hope we were not true alcoholics. But after a while, we had to face the fact that we must find a spiritual basis of life or else.
And what's that? What determines that? Because if we're able to stay sober through our conduct, right, and reading inspirational books of the 12 and 12, would I further need to seek any other solution?
No.
But what would determine that, if I'm not getting sober doing what you're doing, then maybe I'm missing something. Because I've never met anybody who's ever relapsed who's done this and maintained it.
Yeah.
Everybody who's done this, got some sobriety, and relapses because they started placing other things before. Like you hear people say, sobriety is my number 1 priority, right? Well, they just told you it's a behavioral thing, and they haven't developed yet. Because what should be the number 1 thing is my relationship with a power greater than myself that allows me to experience this in all areas of my life. So my focus isn't me and my sobriety. My focus is now me and my relationship with something greater than me that has become personal, that allows me to live a life beyond anything I could have ever created. But I had to get to that point of what? Of relapsing, being beaten into a state of reasonableness. That's what they talked about earlier, right? But most of us, right? Page 43, we hope that it strikes home about Fred's story. We hope it strikes home to thousands like him, not 1 or 2, thousands. I like how they talk about that. Eh? He only felt the nip of the ringer. Most alcoholics have to be pretty mangled before they really commence to solve their problem. Why is that? Because what's our first obsession? Our first obsession is us. Alcohol is the close second. Is when we can no longer stand ourselves, the brain goes, you need some relief. You take a drink, and then you start the whole cycle over again. Anybody here? That's the baffling feature. Regardless of how much I don't want to do it, I keep on doing. So I'm doing things that I don't want to do, and I'm not doing things that I want to do. Go ahead. Page 44.
Perhaps it is going to be that way with you.
Yeah. You ever notice pain and hearing go hand in hand? You ever notice the more pain you're in, the better you hear? And the more better you're feeling, you're just looking for opportunities to share? Pick me, boss, pick me. No. Yes. Go ahead.
But cheer up.
Cheer up. We're the only group of people depressed about the idea. Hey, we have a solution for you beyond anything you could ever imagine. Look at everybody that's went before you. They talk about a life beyond anything that they could ever achieve or accomplish on their own. We have a book. We have since for the last 80 years, we have this remarkable story called Alcoholics Anonymous, right? And the miracle contained in it, and it's available to you. Why are you so depressed? Well, I can't be my own solution anymore. Yeah, I can see why that's been depressing. That's why we're more happy for you than you are, because we know what's on the other side of this thing, right? Can you participate in the saving of your own life? Like, there's got to be something here to hold our kind of people. Like, it's got to be better than anything we've ever experienced before, because we're excitement junkies, are we not? We like if you...
Good.
Huh?
We like feeling good.
Yeah, I like feeling fantastic. And the level of experience that I've had, I used to seek in all the stuff I've done.
Me too.
If I could have got this any other way that I was seeking it, I would still do it. Sometimes I thought I hit this utopia, but it was just before the bright light, but that's another story. But what I've experienced here is far greater. Like, I used to think everybody undersold it. But I couldn't hear what they were saying. Go ahead.
It's true. Definitely.
Once you the best explanation I ever heard was this lady. She's sitting in a meeting. She goes, they were talking about step 12. She said, before experiencing what you people were talking about, all the explanations in the world I couldn't get grasp on. Right? But since I've experienced it, all the explanation in the world can't explain it. But once you've experienced it, you know, like there's no, like, it's like the effect of the first drink when you felt the magic in it. Not from the first time you had a drink, but the first time you felt the magic in a drink. Anybody remember that?
Oh, yeah.
Like it shifted, it created some sort of a euphoria where the promises came true, right? And then the nightmare followed, right? Normal people don't get that. I explained that euphoria to my wife. She goes, what? She says, I get that. Like, she gets an ease feeling from the 2 drinks that she has. You ready? 2 drinks, right? 2. Me, that's not even, that doesn't even start the engine, right? Okay, go ahead.
Okay. Perhaps it's going to be that way with you, but cheer up. Something like half of us thought we were atheists or agnostics. Our experience shows that you need not get disconcerted. If a mere code of morals or a better philosophy of life were sufficient to overcome alcoholism, many of us would have recovered long ago.
Yeah, if this was enough, right?
Yeah.
If read page 449 was enough, page 417 enough, reading inspiration, like if everything we've tried before was enough, we wouldn't be here reading.
Oh,
right?
I wish I could show you my library of the books that I tried to follow before this.
Well, like
all self-help books.
Yeah, like most people, this is the last thing okay, what's this thing you got, right?
Yeah.
And it's always funny that you hear people say, I've never really done this before. We know you haven't done this. Why? Because your experience shows you haven't done this. Because if you've done this, you'd have a different experience. Yeah. Rarely have we seen a person fail who has thoroughly followed our path. When we were in Vancouver, we had like 116 at our big book study on a Friday night. And I'd go, how many people has relapsed as the result of the course of action as laid out in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous? Guess how many hands that went up?
None.
0. And then I'd go, how many people has experienced relapse more than a couple times as the result of not doing this? You know, everybody's hand went up. right? So smashing the obsession that I could be my own solution, as outlined on page 21, is one of the first ideas that has to be smashed, that I could fix this thing. And it puts me in a position of, that's the step one experience that they talked about all the way through, and you can read it later for yourself on page 42, when he had the step one experience. Prior to that, he'd be like most of us, I've been able to stay sober a month and a half, a year, 2 years. I don't fully understand alcoholism. I'm sitting in the 12 and 12 study reading, feeling good about my sobriety, but I haven't really done the same thing as those who put this together has. And then when we relapse, we go back to, what wasn't I doing? I stopped going to meetings. I stopped this. I stopped that. Well, really, you haven't had the experiences laid out by the first 100 men and women of psychic change sufficient enough to recover from the condition that has you relapsing again, right? So the illness was lying dormant. You were confused because you would think you'd be able to see, feel, and touch it. Right? That's what most people, when you hear most people talk about the illness, they talk like they could see, feel, and touch it. The obsession is left. I don't feel like drinking. There's no thought of drinking. I must be okay then. That's one of the delusions in regards to the illness, and the phenomenon is I'm dealing with something I can't see, feel, and touch. That's why they gave us the two examples of Jim, who had all kinds of problems and drank, and then the other guy had no problems and drank. They both suffered from the same condition in the mind. That's the purpose of the story, is to show this condition that centers in the mind. So it's regardless of what's happening around me, it determines what's happening inside of me is the difference. Right? Because there's been you hear a lot of horrific stories where people are able to stay sober. Why? Through their connection, through something greater than themselves. Right? So before it didn't matter where they went, they were getting loaded. And now it doesn't matter where they go, they're okay. Right? Okay?
Many of us would have recovered long ago, but we found that such codes and philosophies did not save us, no matter how much we tried. We could wish to be moral. We could wish to be philosophically comforted. In fact, we could will these things with all our might. But the needed power wasn't there.
So how many people really, when you say really tried to change their life on their own? Oh, yeah. How many times? How many people had the delusion, you're doing good. Here's your 3-month chip. And you think, yeah, I'm doing good. Well, what did you do to feel good? Nothing. Of course you're going to feel good if you stop drinking and using and you're showering now. And you're waking up in your own bed instead of somebody else's. Having trip, bang your head, and shit yourself in 3 months is a pretty good... You'd be feeling better, right? Right? Huh? I could actually... right? I could actually trust a fart now. Can't believe I said that. I was sick. I remember how sick I used to get. Bad. Anybody remember?
Yeah.
It can't be me. The perfect bathroom was the sink.
You don't actually thoroughly remember. You couldn't live with yourself if you actually could.
Yes, it's wow.
I block. Sometimes I start remembering and I just shake it off.
Yeah, what we endure, really. So we change our lives because we can't change what we're doing. So our lives change to accommodate what we're doing. I remember being. Oh man, how many times I tried to get 11 years in and out, right? And I'd go, even when I got sober, it was when I seen the toilet right beside the sink, I thought, perfect, tile bathroom floors. Oh my God, I'll take it, right? And that was one of the things. Where was the tile floors? Check. Sink beside the toilet? Check. Liquor store across the street? Check. Drugstore below me? Check. All the amenities, right?
I don't know if they all are following why you need the sink next to the toilet.
Yeah, people. That way you don't have to determine what end. Otherwise, you have to have the bucket right beside you. When you're that sick, both ends are anyways. We have free-flowing movement. Okay, go ahead.
Oh, okay.
That's why a lot of people don't like this meeting. Yeah, they can't believe, where did they go? We're keeping it real. Go ahead.
In fact, we could will these things with all our might, but the needed power wasn't there. Our human resources, as marshaled by the will, were not sufficient. They failed utterly.
Because what do we have to experience? We have to experience a psychic change or spiritual experience. As explained in the back of our basic text, some are happening suddenly, which is the more sicker people get the suddenly, so they could start the course of action. And then it has to become the educational variety. That most of us, all of us, have to do the educational variety to have. So the more sicker ones, like myself, had the vital spiritual experience, but it wasn't sufficient enough to sustain me. Right? So I'd relapse, right? I've had vital spiritual experience, but not the recipe to maintain and develop and culture it, right? I really didn't have that, right? And the last time, it created a shift sufficient enough where I was able to go through the course of action or become willing to hear what people were suggesting, that I followed in their footsteps. Good. So sufficient, right, to bring about this change that we need. It's very specific, right? I need this ailment removed, because as long as it's present and I can't see, feel, and touch it, if we really want to be truthful, right, I never knew it returned when it did return the last time. When the 3 month, like the last time I relapsed, I had a 3-month chip in my pocket an hour after the meeting. I had no idea what was about to happen. I gave the best talk you ever wanted to hear for a guy that didn't do nothing. Right? I had a talk. It was good. Like, adjust the lights. I'd like to thank me, and I'd like to thank me. But I had no idea, because I wasn't educated on the problem or the solution or what was necessary to have, because the people around me were all 12 and 12. So what they were offering was what we just read. Maybe try this. Phone me before you relapse. Why don't you read this or read that? I've seen guys sit with newcomers and get them to read page 417 every day. You need to have acceptance. The reason you're getting loaded is because you don't have acceptance. You haven't surrendered yet. All those elements without the course of action leads to my own demise. If you said I surrendered to the process, okay, I could do that. Because I was one of those guys, I don't know how many altar calls I did on Sundays, full of remorse, snot running out of my nose, begging God for a different experience that I was having, and begging God not to do the things I was doing, right? And I'd have the people praying their hands over, and I'd feel, like they said, comforted. I'd feel comforted with the idea that maybe there's enough shift that I don't have to have this experience, and I'd pursue my ideas in the church and all that other stuff, and nothing wrong with that, but I didn't realize the change that they're talking about. I haven't experienced it. So I experienced evangelical recovery, I call it. I got feeling really good about things, but the basis of the change wasn't there. I fabricated. Like, I could fabricate. Anybody here think about a story long enough? How many people can make themselves really feel bad here by thinking?
Oh, yeah.
And you feed it, eh? You feed it. Like, you feel like don't interrupt me, shut off the phone. I got to get feeling like snot running up my, I got to really, cultivate this, right? Get the call going on. How many people here has felt like shit and God tried to intervene and get someone to phone you and you don't answer it? Right, so I don't know why I would. So lack of power, even though it's funny. So that's another thing. I get myself in these things and I can't change the course of action I'm in because my mind has me. We'll get into that later. So the specific change that they talk about here is lack of power. And they don't talk about that in here. So the foremost thing that they talk about in the big book that they don't talk about in the 12 and 12 is this. This is the fundamental difference so far. They have explained the problem as they see it, yes? Where in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, they explain the problem as the solution as they understand it, yes? A course of action, right? And the fundamental basis of step 2 is this: lack of power.
Lack of power. That was our dilemma. We had to find a power by which we could live, and it had to be a power greater than ourselves.
Yes, we agree to that, right? We agree to that. Yes, I need a second change of spirit because I haven't... Remember when Bill was sitting with Ebby? Bill seen he had no more power in him than he did himself. Remember that? But there was something happening with Ebby that wasn't happening with Bill. Ebby got access to something that Bill didn't have access to, but he had available to him. Big difference. Like, is like my wife could sit there, drink, say, fundamental Coca-Cola. I may not have one, but in the fridge I have access to it. We have it, but I just don't have one. I need to get access to the same thing she's enjoying, so I need to do certain things to go get that so I can sit and enjoy the same. Does that kind of make sense? And that's how simple this is. This is the same kind of idea, right? And we're going to get into that in a second. So lack of power, that was our dilemma, right? We had to find a power by which we could live, and it had to be a power greater than ourselves. This is where we don't stop and consult each other here.
No.
It's not what we keep reading to see what they're talking about, obviously, but
where and how are we to find this power?
So if you were in a discussion group and you didn't understand the purpose of the Big Book of Alcoholics, if you were reading this and they asked a question, you'd sit around and talk about the question. Here, they're going to answer that question. They're not asking you what you think. That's not the question mark. The question mark isn't where we stop and go, let's ponder that for a second. What do you think? Glad you asked. And I haven't got much to say and go on 20 minutes proving it, right? I haven't got much to say, and 20 minutes later, and in closing, another 15 minutes, right? Wasn't supposed to be a speaker meeting, but I'm glad you're here. So there's a question, where were we to find this power that creates the change that I need to get access to? Otherwise I'm going to die an alcoholic death. Pretty simple, yes?
Yep.
Let's see what it says.
Well, that's exactly what this book is about.
Damn! What? Wait a minute, back that up a bit. What?
What's it about? Well, that's exactly what this book is about.
Not what the 12 and 12 is about.
Right.
The instructions on the manual to get access to this thing in the participating in the saving your own life is not in the 12 and 12. If somebody hasn't been through the Big Book or sponsored in a way that's outlined in Alcoholics Anonymous, what happens somewhere along the line, it took a diversion course. Right? These people up at the top of the page started reading the 12 and 12 and able to fundamentally cultivate this relationship with something greater than them because they don't need to say change their spiritual experience. So they're able to cultivate these principles and ideas that we just read on the top of page 45. But the alcoholic, with hardly an exception, won't be able to do that. Here's where we lose a lot of people, right? Because a lot of people got taught this is the process. It's irresponsibility of it's actually not the design of Alcoholics Anonymous. And working with others, they say lend them a copy of the Big Book, not the 12 and 12. The first thing we should offer new people in the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous is the Big Book. Ask them to go through it. If they can't go through it, get them audio as they go through it. Explain it to them. Take them through it. Then ask them if they want to go through the rest of the process. And if they do, that you'll be there to help them. Why? Because you have the practical experience yourself of having gone through it. Yes?
Yeah.
This here is also houses the traditions. When you actually get to reading the traditions, you see they've been already in place long before you suspected them. They're the first thing you get introduced to in the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous by experiencing the traditions without realizing you're experiencing them. Because the members who are putting on that meeting and the members who are there to be of service are doing the scope of the outline of the traditions. Right? It's really amazing when you sit there and realize, when you look back, you see the traditions have been in place long before you understood they were happening. But with the steps, you need to get involved in them in order for them to happen. It's two different things, right? I need to participate in the process to experience the steps. I just need to sit in a meeting to experience the traditions. Mm-hmm. Pretty wild, eh? So that's exactly what this book is about. So as we go through here, right, the basis of what they talk about is fundamentally, how can I shift my thinking, right, in order to see what's available to me if I go through this course of action. So they talk about on page 50, which is really interesting. You talk about in our personal stories. You see that?
Yep.
Okay, page 50.
Second paragraph. In our personal stories, you will find a wide variation in the way each teller approaches and conceives of the power which is greater than himself. Whether we agree with a particular approach or conception seems to make little difference. Experience has taught us that these are matters about which, for our purpose, we need not be worried.
So when people start talking about their understanding and their idea of God, it's really none of our business. Right? Like when I do these studies, I don't get into my particular belief and the core of my belief system. I talk about what got me to where I am is the fundamental belief that lack of power is my dilemma, and I had to get access to power. That's all our collective understanding. And in spiritual experience, they talk about as the result of going through this course of action, all our members have tapped into an inner resource of strength. What are you talking about? That's what Bill talked about. That's what all these people talk about, where we move from the cheese factory into our consciousness. We make the shift from an intellectual approach to a spiritual approach. The thing within inside of us. Go ahead, and we'll get to that in a second. Go.
There are questions for each individual to settle for himself. On one proposition, however, these men and women are strikingly agreed. Every one of them.
Okay, so wait a minute. Every one of them, every single one of them. This is the collective understanding and experience, right? If you went through this, lack of power is our dilemma. Yes or no? Yes. Do I need access to a power? Yes. What I call it is secondary, right? Do I believe it's accessible to me the same way as it's accessible to you, right? And then they'll get into the secret of where they're hiding it in a second.
Every one of them has gained access to and believes in a power greater than himself.
As we understand it, collectively.
Mm-hmm.
Right? That's our collective understanding. The lack of power is our dilemma. The solution is power. Whether you call it a Samsung or micro, whatever your phone device is secondary. Do I have access to what it's used for? Yes. Do I have all the programs and all the things that you have? No, I don't care. Can I dial out? And even when I don't have a connection to a provider, I can still dial 911. That's how come most of us are here. We're able to dial 911, even though we had no connection to something greater than ourselves. Something had a connection to us that heard us and sent us somebody like Bill. Abby showed up in Bill's life, right? I don't believe. It's okay. You don't have to believe. You'll be contacted shortly. Relax. Just take it easy. Right?
So cool. Yep. This power has in each case accomplished the miraculous, the humanly impossible. As the celebrated American statesman put it, let's look at the record. Here are thousands of men and women, worldly indeed. They flatly declare that since they have come to believe in a power greater than themselves, to take a certain attitude towards that power, and to do certain simple things, there's been a revolutionary change in their way of living and thinking. In the face of collapse and despair, and in the face of total failure of their human resources, they found that a new power, peace, happiness, and sense of direction flowed into them.
And where's the instructions for that? That's what this book is about. Not the 12 and 12. The big book will allow me to have that experience. That creates, this is a basic synopsis of the spiritual appendix in the back of the book. It's just saying the same thing. When you hear people talk about the 9-step promises, the 10-step promises, right? And they're really all the same thing as the spiritual appendix in the back of the book. They're all saying the same. They don't happen individually. They all happen simultaneously at the same time. As the result of all the steps, not some of them. Because if you can get the experience of some of the steps, we wouldn't do the rest of the steps, would we? No. If I can get paid a full week for 3 days of work, guess how many days of work I'm doing? We're just those type of people, right? Yeah. Some of these we bought. That one, and that one. Okay, go ahead.
This happened soon after they wholeheartedly met a few simple requirements.
Humility, fearlessness, and honesty is the recipe to this whole thing, right? That willingness to pursue something here, right? That's it. Nothing more is required. Am I willing? Do I want to participate? Can I participate in the saving of my own life? Can I maybe follow the rest of the guidance that's laid out in the book to have this experience, right? On the next page, it says here where it shifts. So from page 44, before that is all about alcoholism. The problem, solution, and the course of action that they talked about to bring about. The rest of the book talks about the human condition. Alcoholism is not the same thing as what we suffer from in regards to the human condition, right? So we had to ask ourselves, page 52.
We had to ask ourselves, middle of the page, why we shouldn't apply to our human problems the same readiness to change our point of view.
Not our alcoholism, because we agreed alcoholism beyond our pay grade. There's only two symptoms in alcoholism. What we're left when we're sober is the human condition. Why does the insanity return? Because we haven't found a sufficient enough solution for the human condition. Right? And when we find that solution, have this experience, the problem's removed, we know there's only one thing we have to concentrate on is now my relationship with something greater than myself. Go ahead.
We were having trouble with personal relationships.
Anybody? No. Yeah.
We couldn't control our emotional nature, skipping over that one.
Every now and then, right? Not all the time, just every now and then. And when shit hits the fan, it hits the fan. Everybody heading for the hills.
Everybody running. We were prey to misery and depression.
Prey. Prey. Okay, you get that later, right? Okay, go ahead.
We couldn't make a living. We had a feeling of uselessness. We were full of fear. We were unhappy. We couldn't seem to be of real help to other people. Was not a basic solution of these bedevilments more important than whether we should see newsreels of lunar flight? Of course it was.
So they're saying you're going to pursue a solution. How many people sat in meetings trying to figure out how they were going to solve the problem that they created?
Yeah.
I got an hour to figure this out. You guys continue the meeting. I got some shit to figure out here. They're saying, "Whoa, wait a minute. Of course, when we actually saw something other than ourselves."
Yeah.
Go ahead.
When we saw others solve their problem by a simple reliance upon the spirit of the universe, we had to stop doubting the power of God. Our ideas did not work, but the God idea did. Yeah,
it's like, how do you argue with thousands of people? So on page 55, the secret to the whole thing that isn't in here, it's not in the 12 and 12, it's in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, the collective understanding is where do we find access to this power? And you would never think to look there, right? Deep down within. Page 55, look at that this week, right? Last paragraph, we could only...
What, 55?
Yep.
Or no, back 55?
55.
Clear the ground a bit. Oh, we skipped my favorite part.
Okay, well, let's go back. We got a couple minutes.
Okay, I gotta do it. That's my favorite. Actually, we were fooling ourselves. For deep down in every man, woman, and child is the fundamental idea of God. It may be obscured by calamity, by pomp, by worship of other things. Which
covers page 54. It's a good read on page 54. Talks about the human condition and our perplexities and complexities and why we so obsessed with self and why we're a sum result of everything we think, feel, and say. But that's 54. Go ahead. 55.
But in some form or another, it is there. For faith in a power greater than ourselves and miraculous demonstrations of that power in human lives are fact as old as man himself. We finally saw that faith in some kind of God was a part of our makeup, just as much as the feeling we have for a friend. Sometimes we had to search fearlessly, but he was there. He was as much a fact as we were. We found the great reality deep down within us. In the last analysis, it is only there that he may be found.
The last place we would look and not even think of looking at unless somebody pointed it out to us. That's why it's not in the 12:12, it's in the big book, right? It's this life force, this lifeline, this thing is inside of you. It's been talking to you. It's been asking you, what the hell have you been doing? What's the matter with you? Like, come on, anybody got that voice? What the hell are you doing now? You're trying to get us both killed? Right? You ever wonder who that voice is? Inside of you is like, holy shit, don't do that. Leave me alone. Oh my God, I shouldn't have done that. Listen to me when I'm talking to you. No, okay, go ahead. Oh my God, I had a moment. Quick, keep reading.
We can only clear the ground a bit. If our testimony helps sweep away prejudice, enables you to think honestly, encourages you to search diligently within yourself, then, if you wish, you can join us on the broad highway. With this attitude, you cannot fail. The consciousness of your belief is sure to come to you.
Boom! Keep walking with us. Keep moving forward. Love you. May the force be with you. Live long and prosperous. I had a good time tonight. We lost a couple of people. I thought I was losing my touch. Usually we get 50. Usually lose 10 people or something. New dawn. Keep the faith. Keep happening. Keep moving forward. Stay away from the guys or whatever else floats your boat. You know what I mean? Huh? Find God before you find a boyfriend this time. For God's sake. No. Yeah, I remember a lot of girls, the girls who were sober for a while says, find them before God does. Okay, anyways, we're going to close with the Serenity Prayer before I get in trouble here. What do we need for a good life? God. Grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Live long and prosperous. Any questions after, let us know. There's some information in the chat if you want to join us on Facebook, on our Facebook group, right? And that's it.